So I'm gonna find my. I saw it. Whatever. Oh.
Do I have time to grab these?
Okay. No worries. Yeah.
Hey. Yeah, yeah. Oh, wait. What is that street? I didn't see it.
For participants online, sound check.
So it's basically it's a Christmas present, but it's
Yeah, that's.
I can take things like the agendas all over and download it on here, and then I can annotate from the handwriting.
For those joining WebEx online, sound check. Thank you. Is that Miss DC?
It was.
Thank you.
Participant has joined the meeting.
You can start, I'm sorry.
We'll now call the meeting to order. Will you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Almost, I was gonna say.
We'll move into item 3, our safety moment, and I will turn it over to Rich Dalton. I'm sorry. Yes, my apologies. Will you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Alcorn.
Here.
Ms. Bagley. Here. Ms. Bailey. Mr. Banks. Ms. Baumke.
Here.
Ms. Franklin.
Present.
Ms. Garvey. Ms. Hayes.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Ms. Lawson. Here. Mr. McLaughlin.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Stork. Mr. Walkinshaw.
Here.
Ms. Young. And Madam Chair, we do have a quorum, just barely.
No one. Now we will move into item 3, our safety moment, and I will turn it over to Rich Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick safety moment. In the event that we need to evacuate this space, our primary evacuation route is going to be through the double wooden doors to the back of the room there. We'll evacuate through. We'll take the stairwell, not the elevator, down to the first floor, pop out, and muster in the parking lot to the east of this building. Our secondary route is going to be through the single wood door all the way down to the end of the hallway and down a flight of stairs, and we'll muster outside once we can get outside that building. In the event that we do need first responders in this room, I'm going to ask Chris Henry in the back there to be our primary 911 caller. I'm going to ask, let's see, Karen in the back there to be our secondary 911 caller. If we need CPR, AED, first aid, any of those types of items, let's see, let me get Robert in the back to be primary. I'll be secondary since I'm sitting up on this end. And of course, if we do need the AED or any first aid type items, we do have kits attached to the wall there adjacent to the elevator. And then finally, just from in the event of an active shooter, we'll run, hide, and fight last. So with that, that's my safety moment, Madam Chair.
Any questions for Mr. Dalton? Right, we'll now move into item 4, approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any amendments to the agenda? Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Moved by Vice Chair Mr. Walkinshaw. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Bomke. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Now move into item 5, approval of the minutes from February 18th, 2022.
So move. Second.
Does anyone have any corrections or amendments to the minutes? There is a motion by Ms. Bomke, seconded by Ms. Garvey. Excuse me, any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? We'll now move into item 6, Chair's comments. So first, just want to welcome everyone, obviously, to this meeting. And I know there was a bit of fog this morning, so for those of you that traveled far, thank you for being here and hope it was a safe trip. Quick reminder that we are live streaming the meeting. There are mics throughout the room, so please keep side conversations to minimum. If Ms. Gary is present, I'd like to welcome Supervisor Gary from Stafford County. Ms. Gary here. Okay. Ms. Gary is currently the alternate, but we expect her to become the primary member after PRTC acts in April. And so we'll say that again once she's back on officially. At our January meeting, we thank DRPT Director Jennifer Mitchell for her 8 years of service to the Commonwealth. Today is officially her last day. She was a true friend of VRE and instrumental in laying the groundwork for and launching the $4 billion Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative, an initiative that will hugely benefit VRE service. So I'm pleased to report that next month she will assume the post of Deputy Administrator at the Federal Railroad Administration. There, Jennifer will play a significant role in implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law. Jennifer DeBrule, who has been DRPT's Chief of Public Transportation for over 5 years, will serve as acting director. She has more than 25 years of public service in transportation, so congratulations to both of them. I do want to bring up a couple of things for discussion. In the executive meeting, we were to discuss the idea of moving the April board meeting from April 15th to that of the following week, April 22nd. 15th is Good Friday, and as the start of Passover, that week may be difficult for some individuals. So just wondering if there's anyone who is opposed to moving the date because of Good Friday. And do we need to vote on that or? Okay. If there can be a motion
To approve.
moved by Ms. Bomke, is there a second? Second by Ms. Garvey. Any discussion?
Madam Chair,
Ms. Lawson,
thank you. I'm sorry, what date did you say we're moving it to?
to the 22nd.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion?
No, just thank you for that consideration.
Thank you. Thank you for Mr. Dawson and staff. Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? All right, so on to a little bit more of a difficult discussion. We've discussed the secretary position before. I'd like to bring that back again to have some type of resolution. My personal opinion is perhaps we move as we've had, and then maybe set up a bylaws committee or set up some type of committee to discuss making the appropriate changes to get jurisdictions in the South more representation. But again, we'd like to start that discussion. Again, I don't want to take a lot of time to do it, but I know it's very important to all of us, and then particularly of certain jurisdictions. So I'm going to open it up to see kind of what people think. I'd like to, for purposes of this year, go ahead and fill the secretary position, preferably with MVTC, just because that's what we've been doing. But I do understand that there are some people that would prefer to make the change now to give those southern jurisdiction more representation. So I'd like to kind of just start that discussion. Mr. Kelly.
As the one who kind of brought it up, I'm fine with moving forward, just on the understanding that there will be a committee and there will be a change, because frankly, as this organization keeps expanding, it's the southern jurisdictions that are going to be the fastest growing and have the most population added into the mix. And having been on here for a little while, there were times when some jurisdictions were on this board alternately because they had so low ridership. And I do think, as we do, frankly, City of Fredericksburg with PRTC, we defer to Prince William County on most everything, and because you guys are the biggest users, you've put the most money into it, and I think there needs to be some understanding that jurisdictions that have a large amount of ridership should be on the executive committee. And that's frankly not been the case the last few years.
Mr. Walker?
I think it's obviously a healthy discussion to have. I think just a couple points that I would make. One, I think any change, Steve, please correct me if I'm wrong here, a change to our bylaws would have to be approved by the parent commissions.
No, this is a decision entirely.
Got
The only way the commission would be required to get involved is if it somehow contradicted the master agreement, which it doesn't in this case. Got it.
Okay. I think just speaking from an MBTC perspective, I think most of us would feel that it's important to maintain a 50-50 split between MBTC and PRTC on the executive committee. Also point, in terms of the ridership growth, this surprised me. If you look at the 2016 to 2019 ridership, the jurisdiction that had growth in ridership that was measurable and significant actually was Fairfax County. Other jurisdictions saw a decline. So who knows what will happen as we come out of the pandemic, and certainly over the next decades, southern jurisdictions will grow at a faster rate, but Fairfax is growing too. Our ridership is growing. So, I think all that's good to have in the conversation. I think this year, I think the committee brought forth Ms. Bagley, am I right?
I believe that's correct.
To serve as secretary, and Mr. Banks representing PRTC as well. And I think from the nomination committee's perspective, had there been someone from one of the southern jurisdictions that expressed an interest or was suggested, that would have been considered, and we might have already elected that person as secretary. No, not negative about treasurer. About Mr. Banks. So, and we did have Mr. Skinner as chair of the VRE board in 2020. So we've only had 1 year, 2021, and now 2 years, 2022, without the southern jurisdictions represented. So I don't know, what the longer history has been and how long maybe you all were excluded, but that hasn't been the case in the last several years. And I certainly hope it won't be the case next year or moving forward. So I think it's a good conversation to have. But I can just tell you from my perspective, I think from MBTC's perspective, given that we have two parent commissions, having equal representation is important to us.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Lawson?
To Mr. Walkinshaw's point, I believe that your ridership has grown so much that you're now paying a larger subsidy than Prince William County. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna move that we appoint or vote Ms. Bagley as the Secretary of the Executive Committee.
Okay, there is a motion on the floor, seconded by Mr. Alcorn. Is there any other discussion on the motion? Ms. Bomke?
I don't have any comments. I think that's great that we're putting somebody into that position for this year, but I do agree with City Councilman Kelly that it does need to be revisited this year and that, perhaps some changes can be made, but let's move forward and, get our slate together for this year.
Sure. Mr. Alcorn?
Oh, thank you. And I appreciate the comments by everybody. And I certainly have heard, that discussion in terms of the officers. There's also some other discussion. It's not just ridership, but it's who's putting money in and how much and all that. And that probably needs to be in the mix, is in the discussion as well. So I think it is a good conversation, just to make sure that that our processes are reflecting sort of the system as it's growing.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Lawson?
To your point, Mr. Alcorn, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rich, but the amount of your subsidy is dictated by your ridership.
As spelled out in the master agreement.
Right, so I think all the more reason why you do, I'm more than comfortable with 50-50. I mean, that's why Fairfax County now has 3 members of the operations board. For a long time, it was 2.
Any other discussion or comments, Mr. Smith?
I just weigh in that I support the discussion of Mr. Kelly. Suggested, I would encourage that.
All in favor? Any opposed? Passes. Do we, and yeah, do we need to set up a committee, a bylaws committee to start kind of exploring this particular change?
No.
Potential change?
Madam
You
Chair,
certainly have that power yourself, Mr. Chairman. You can appoint a committee.
Mr. Walkinshaw?
I was gonna move that we establish a committee, but I don't think we need to. You can establish it yourself.
Okay, is there anyone interested in serving on the committee? Mr. Kelly? Anyone, Mr. Walkinshaw, Ms. Garvey? And I'm assuming Ms. Lamb wrote that down, and then if anyone else is interested, just let us know. Ms. Bomke? Okay, so we'll get that started and send out some information. If you're interested, think about it a little bit more, let us know. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge that today is Transit Worker Appreciation Day. It's these frontline workers at VRE and all the transit agencies in the region that have continued to perform what is often a difficult job under the best of circumstances, but even more so in this very turbulent time. They have kept us moving during the pandemic, and we appreciate their dedication. So if we can just applaud for our transit workers. Now I'll turn it over to Mr. Dalton for his report and introduction of our special guests.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to confirm on the technology side, we do have the guest speakers on the line there. Mr. Duquette. Okay, so without further ado, just want to introduce Secretary Miller, Deputy Secretary Jen Deasy, and Assistant Secretary Michael Sargent. They are participating remotely here, and the Secretary and his team graciously accepted our invitation to at least participate remotely and just address the board. There's no set agenda here or anything like that, but so with that, I will turn to Secretary Miller first and allow the Secretary to open with some remarks.
Well, good morning. It's great to be with you all this morning. I'm sorry we could not be there in person, but the one good thing to come out of COVID is all this virtual stuff allows more participation and easier for some folks, and we're just glad to be involved this morning. Obviously, we've all had challenges through the pandemic, and VRE is certainly in that boat along with so many others. I look forward to seeing how the Commonwealth continued to help y'all. You've been an incredibly important part of transportation up the I-95 corridor, and you're taking a bunch of folks in an expeditious way to where they need to go and keeping them off the highway at the same time. It's a safe route. It's a quick route, and we're just excited that we can return to some normalcy and get some people back on your trains. It'll be, we're most curious about, I'm sure as you are, is or we're looking back a year or two from now, where do we end up? What kind of ridership are we going to get back? What's the federal government going to ultimately do? And that affect all of us. So we're sort of standing by it like you and trying to understand that and the effects and how we have to adjust. We spent some time yesterday with the folks from Vermont, and they have similar situations in terms of the ridership, and they were suggesting to us that maybe they're looking at 60% of what they've had in the past would be the new normal going forward. And I don't know if that's true or not. I'm hoping it's more than that, frankly, but we'll see. But that was their thought. So, you know, where will VRE end up, and what will the commuting public be doing? I'd love to hear some more thoughts from the rest of y'all as to where you think you're ending up, and what we can do to help, because you're an important part of our system. And you know, I'm new in this game. I've been on the transportation board for a number of years, but I'm certainly no expert on rail or VRE. And so I'm here to learn a lot and be part of the team and help you all as much as I can. Deputy Secretary Deasy's on the line as well. She's had a load of experience in the transit sector, and has been on the Hill for a number of years. And so I'm sure she has some thoughts and would like to say hello as well. So with that, and if y'all have questions, I'm happy to answer them as best I can, but I'll turn it over to Deputy Secretary Deasy.
Thanks. Hi, guys. Jen Deasy. I have worked with some of you over the years. I was on Capitol Hill, mostly at the Senate Banking Committee, so working on public transportation. And then I spent a year after we passed the FAST Act at the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. So I have worked with some of you in either of those capacities, and I'm excited to be working for Secretary Miller and Governor Youngkin down here in Richmond now. So looking forward to working with y'all.
I think Michael's on the line. Michael, are you on the line? He was going to try to dial in. Michael Sargent, are you on the line or not? Perhaps he is not.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, there he is.
Can you?
We can hear you now. Go ahead.
All right. Well, so nice to meet you all. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. Again, I'm Michael Sargent. I'm the Assistant Secretary working with Secretary Miller and Governor Youngkin. And I also, like Jen, have experience in Washington, and really excited to be here in Richmond and working with all of you all.
Okay.
Let me just say one thing and sort of to wrap that up. We're really blessed in Richmond to have this team. We've got a lot of smart people that have got a lot of good experience, and I'm just excited to be part of this group. So we're here to help, assist, and support as best we can, and we'll be looking forward to opportunities to do that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Miller, and to your staff. We're looking forward to working with all of you. And Ms. Deasy, it looks like you made it out on Capitol Hill. Myself and Mr. Walkinshaw are very happy to be on the other side of that. So congratulations to you as well. Are there any questions for Secretary Miller or Undersecretary? Yes.
Mr. Secretary, it's Matt Kelly with the City of Fredericksburg. A very big question, because it's one that we at the local level have been asking for a long, long time. And that is the future of transportation funding. Is there anything that you all are looking at to deal with the changing dynamics of transportation funding and looking at new funding sources, shifting funding sources? Some initiatives coming out of Richmond in the next year or two?
Well, you know, that's a great question. And I can't tell you anything definitively. We've looked at all sorts of things going forward. Obviously, the whole gas tax thing is at risk and at question, as you see a lot of people transition from using gasoline to using electricity and doing other things. So we've looked at vehicle miles traveled. We've looked at all sorts of things, but I can't tell you that there's any one thing that sort of is teed up to move into. So unfortunately, I'd have to sort of suggest you just stay tuned. We're working on those things. You know, in various parts of the Commonwealth over the last number of years, they've used sales taxes, particularly in Hampton Roads, to build a heck of a lot of stuff, much more so than the gas tax has done down there. So, and some of those projects with their 0.7 cents of sales tax raised billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars for Hampton Roads to help new bridge tunnels and new bridges and do express lanes and so forth. So, you know, lots of things are sort of on the drawing board and on the talking, in the talking circuit, but, I can't tell you that anything has been, decided or if there's anything that's sort of is a front runner at this point. By the way, my family, my father's family's from Fredericksburg, so it's always nice to be talking to folks from Fredericksburg. They live down on the end of Caroline Street, sort of at the end of the historic district down there. So we're big Fredericksburg fans. It's a lot different than when I grew up, though. I'll tell you that.
Very different.
Great place. So I'm sorry I can't give you a more definitive answer, but that's sort of where we are.
More questions for Secretary Miller? Mr. Walkinshaw?
Yeah, Secretary Miller, thank you so much for joining. James Walkinshaw from Fairfax County. Maybe just more of a comment. A lot of things that you already know. I know you have a business background. Just want to stress the key role that VRE plays in Northern Virginia and Virginia's continued economic success and economic development success. Obviously, the biggest and highest profile example is Amazon HQ2, and a lot of strengths of our region allowed us to be successful there, but VRE and National Landing's proximity to VRE station was really key. So appreciate your and Governor Youngkin's continued support for VRE and commitment to our continued economic success. And we want to keep being successful, so at least from Fairfax's perspective, we can keep contributing to fund education all across Virginia, and that economic success is really key to that. So thank you for your commitment to that.
Yes, sir. I think we're keenly aware of the importance of VRE and sort of the driver that you've been for lots of things. Transportation, that's one of the big parts about it, is it drives that economic development. And as I mentioned earlier, we had some time with WMATA yesterday, and certainly that's had the same impact up in your neck of the woods. With all the stuff that's sprouted up around the stations. We were Monday. We were in Tyson's Corner for the 495 next groundbreaking, and wow, I grew up going to Reston and Tyson's Corner and out in that area when I was a kid. And just to see what's there now versus what was there then, and it's sort of how quickly it's come, and really what they expect for it to continue to do is just phenomenal. And it's really not just about Northern Virginia, because that helps drive the whole Commonwealth, and so everybody sort of wins in that regard. So we're keenly aware, sir, of the importance, and that's why we're partnering up with you and trying to make sure you're successful as you can be.
Maybe one more question for the Secretary. Ms. Pomke.
So thank you, Secretary Miller, for being here today. I'm Meg Bomke on the Stafford County Board of Supervisors. And while this doesn't directly relate to VRE, I do, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but since we have this opportunity to speak with you, people in Stafford are most concerned about the overflow of I-95 and the impact on our secondary roads. And I'm sure Fairfax and everyone else sitting here in this room has the same concern. But I also want to bring up that it's wherever you are in the nation, when you talk about Virginia and Interstate 95, it doesn't matter if it's young people or the older generation. It's not good, as you know, when they say, oh, Fredericksburg, Stafford, that's where the traffic stops. And as you know, that's not something you want to be known for. And I just bring that up because when I'm in Florida and people make those comments, it just makes me cringe. So I know we're doing the southbound and the northbound river crossing, and I just hope those have a huge impact. But anything that we can do for transportation in Virginia is, will be an improvement. So I know you haven't contributed to our I-95 issues, but I just wanted to bring that up since we had an extra couple of minutes. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's, it's an obvious problem. The solutions aren't easy. And, we're working on the FedEx thing is underway. And, as you indicated, we're working on those bridges. How much more can we do there? Well, that's, one of the reasons VRE is so important and other modes like this. It's going to be really interesting, and I don't want to take up y'all's time, but, if you think 20 or 30 years from now, and if we were able to project out and sort of look back, what's transportation going to look like in 30 years? It could be radically different than what it is today, and certainly 40 years. And we're building these things for 70 years. And if anybody thinks it's going to look like it looks today, 70 years from now, I would probably have a fair amount of argument with you. So, it's interesting times. It's tough stuff that you're talking about. Tons of money. I mentioned the 495 next project. That's a complicated place up there with interchanges and bridges and so forth. But we're spending with our partners spending, Transurban is spending $688 million on 2.5 miles of road. And just think about those numbers. It's just, it's mind blowing, frankly. So we've just got to find other ways. There's just not enough. There's not enough money to pave our way out of this problem. And that's why the VREs of the world and the metros of the world and other things we haven't even thought about yet are really going to be really important to moving people in the future. And we'll see what the effect of the pandemic is. I'm hopeful that people are going to go back to work and VRE is going to be full again. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. We'll adjust to it and we'll do what we have to do. So, tough problem. We're aware of it. There's never enough money to fix it all, nor is there enough room to fix it all, but we're going to keep focused on it and try to make it as good as we can make it. And the good news is we've had more money in the system than we've ever had. So we'll be trying to make sure we use that money extremely well, wisely, and where it has the most return on investment for the citizens of the Commonwealth. So no silver bullets, I'm afraid, but you can rest assured we understand and we're all working to the same end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary Miller. We appreciate your time and we're looking forward to meeting you hopefully in person very soon. So if we can give them a round of applause.
Appreciate it. I hope you don't mind if we just sort of hang in here and listen and learn a little bit.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, on behalf of the VRE staff, thank you, Secretary Miller, Deputy Secretary DC, and Assistant Secretary Sargent for participating today. Moving on, let's let me just in the balance of my report, of course, under the safety section, just wanted to state that this past week, we had a couple of events out at our maintenance and storage facilities with our partners, Keolis Rail Services Virginia. And these were events that held multi-pronged purposes. We were celebrating some very long tenured times or periods with these different teams in terms of no lost time injuries, but really it's about enhancing and maintaining our positive safety culture. So these were good events, and it was good to get out there and have an opportunity to speak directly with our onboard train crews, our mechanical operations teams, and and once again thank them for the safe work that they do. Under ridership, for the month of February, we did bounce back from the, I'll just say just about the trough, if you will.
particularly the last several months. We did bounce back in terms of overall ridership. I will note that 18 service days in the month of February yielded about 53,000 riders. Just as a little bit of a teaser for the month of March. We're going to get into a lot more of this information here in a bit, but we anticipate through today, which is the 14th service day for March, we've equaled that same amount of ridership there with approximately 9 more service days left. And that equates to, not to underscore February and jump to March, but that equates to about 1,000 additional riders on an average daily ridership basis. So once again, we'll get into this a little bit, but that's where we are starting to see that, albeit just a handful, not only on the federal agency side, but on the private employer side, we're starting to see that open up once again. But hold that thought there. We're gonna get into some more details here in the information items. On-time performance was good. This is, as you know, our target is 95 or 90%. System-wide, 95%. I do want to point out, and it kind of, I do get a little leery when we start seeing near perfection, if you will, but on the Fredericksburg line, 98% on-time performance. And this really is just kind of symbolic of a lot of work that's gone in over the past several months. As you know, as we went back to a full service back in June, and then we incorporated some service changes, all of that. We had some opportunities there collectively together. So this is symbolic of that effort at some level. But I also want to point out too that, you know, where we're headed in terms of a lot of the projects that will be going on, particularly in the Fredericksburg line. You know, this includes a couple of work zones that are out there on us daily. And I just have to say our partners at CSX, my hat's off to them. They've already started to understand the importance of managing those work zones and managing, of course, safety is paramount, but being able to manage trains through those work zones and not have a detrimental effect to our ridership. Again, I don't want to set the anticipation that we're going to see that every month because our target is 90%, but I did want to highlight that. And then finally, I'll give Mr. George Schwartz a few minutes here to give us an update on all things legislative wise, both south from here in Richmond and north from here in DC, and anything else he wants to give you an update on. So, Madam Chair, Mr. Schwartz.
Madam Chair, members of the board, as you know, the Virginia legislative session came to a close on Saturday, sort of. They didn't pass a budget, so there will be a special session. It's going to be later this spring. We don't have the dates quite yet. In addition to the budget, several conference committees did not finish their work on their bills, and those will be carried over into the special session as well. One of those is the grocery tax bills, which we talked about, and which, when enacted, will lead to a reduction in transportation funding. So leading up to the special session, and of course during it, we, along with other regional partners and people throughout the Commonwealth, will be continuing to push for some resolution on that lost transportation funding. Right now, the most likely outcome is an enactment clause that will be added to the bill requiring the state to study funding revenue sources and recommend changes that will increase the sustainability of those sources. On to some better news, HB 444, which was Delegate Bennett Parker's bill that allows electronic meetings to be held by public bodies outside of a declared emergency, did pass, although it was amended substantially in the Senate. The amendment does prevent some public bodies, like your local government boards, from holding completely virtual public meetings. But we believe that the commissions, and therefore VRE, should be able to hold 25% of its meetings in an all virtual format after adopting a policy to that effect. There's a delayed enactment on this until September 1st of 2022 to allow the FOIA Council to hold a work group to develop best practices for agencies across the Commonwealth. And I'm sure most of you know this, but the governor announced on Wednesday that he will be sending down a bill during the special session to suspend all of the gas tax for 3 months and then to phase it back in slowly in August and September. The governor's proposal would also cap the annual adjustment to the gas tax to no more than 2%. I'll stop there for a second if anybody has any questions on the state side.
Mr. Kelly?
That's requesting that the state study alternative sources of funding has been, what, over a decade? Well over a decade that they've been studying. I realize, I'm hopeful that anything comes out of it this time. Is it something on some of these issues, because they're becoming critical for us long-term, that, and I've asked this once before, that this board, I mean, we represent a large chunk of the Commonwealth of Virginia around this table. And maybe it's time we send something up and say, guys, you've been studying this for how long? It's time for you to come up with absolute proposals, at least ask for an action coming out of this. I know we continually express concerns and we're worried, but we never have an ask. And I don't know if that's something this board wants to go to, but I think it's time that we start taking advantage, frankly, of the fact that we represent a large chunk of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And even though I know that we have different political views around this table, I think we all agreed on the fact that the state needs to get off there and come up with something on transportation funding, or else we're going to be sending letters after letters after letters like we've been doing in the past. Just a thought.
Any other questions on the state side, Ms. Garvey?
I think Mr. Kelly's making a good point. And this might be a good time. All the craziness that's going on in the world, price of gas, and I think having all the car manufacturers said they're only doing electric after 2030, I think, something like that. So I think the public maybe is starting to realize times are really changing. So that might help build, maybe the ground is finally kind of prepared to actually take some action. But I think he's making a really good point.
Any other questions on the state issues? All right, Mr. Schwartz.
Well, then moving on to the federal, a full year FY22 THUD appropriation was passed last week and the president signed it into law on Tuesday. As I mentioned before, this unlocks additional funding levels for transportation programs that were authorized under the bipartisan infrastructure law. Most of the federal funding that VRE receives comes through formula programs. And while the FTA hasn't yet released the updated apportionment tables, it's expected VRE formula funds will increase about 30%. Now, as a reminder, service providers in large urban areas like VRE do not receive operating assistance from the federal government. So we're talking about capital and state of good repair funding here that's going to go up by about 30%. The largest increases were for discretionary programs, which almost double. These programs are like DOT's RAISE grants, FTA's capital investment grants, which are like new starts and small starts and core capacity, and FRA's CRISI grants, just to name a few. So we will continue to evaluate the various programs and our funding needs to find the opportunities to take advantage of these funding sources, either individually or partnering up with DRPT or the Passenger Rail Authority or others. I had the opportunity to attend the American Public Transportation Association's legislative conference in DC. Most of the discussion centered around the bipartisan infrastructure law and the FY22 appropriations. We heard from Secretary Buttigieg, FTA Administrator Fernandez, and FRA Administrator Bose, as well as a number of transportation committee chairs from Capitol Hill who touted the BIL and 22 appropriations, and they all expressed an interest in efficient and expedited implementation of those bills. And then lastly, I wanted to mention that the TSA's mask mandate for public transportation was due to expire today. Recently, they extended that a month to April 18th. But as you may have seen earlier this week, the Senate actually passed a bill to eliminate that mandate completely. We're unsure at this point how that's going to go in the House, but it does seem to have bipartisan support, so keep an eye on that.
Any questions about the federal priorities?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I'll take any other questions, but that's the end of my report.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Dalton? Yes, please.
So no questions, but I do want to state that as part of the Transform Rail and Virginia agreements with VRE, Amtrak, CSX, and others, we are continuing to meet in Rich's team's meetings as well on service issues to be able to enhance, optimize service, if you will. It's good to see that the Fredericksburg line is doing well. But we're also making sure that anything done to one entity, whether it be CSX, Amtrak, Virginia, or VRE, doesn't not necessarily harm the other. Do also want to note that we will likely be turning on a couple of new Amtrak trains this summer. That's part of the deal, part of the agreements. For those who might remember, there were a couple post-acquisition trains that we can start. One of which is going to Norfolk, which will add more options from Northeast Corridor, DC, Richmond to Norfolk. Another one will be starting as part of the agreement with Norfolk Southern to extend another Roanoke train. But I want to ensure the board that we are making sure that we will be reaching out to Rich's team, if they haven't already. I know my team was this week, to set up meetings to make sure that those don't unduly influence VRE service. In fact, the Roanoke train, the time was purposely selected so it will not hit the VRE rush hour along the Manassas line. So it's coming much later than rush hour times. So a lot of people get to DC in the evening, it might be 9 or 10 p.m., but if those coming up want a full night's rest before the next day. So we do keep those things in mind, but do want to mention that we're really key on time performance for all modes. So we'll be working with Richard's team. We've already been doing so. We're great to work.
That's great. Thank you for that update. Else?
That's it, Madam Chair.
We will now move into item 8, public comment time. VRE accepts public comments both in person and electronically via the VRE website. Members of the public wishing to make public comments have 3 minutes and should state their full name and the jurisdiction they live in. And written comments submitted before 8 a.m. this morning will be forwarded to the members of the board, read into the minutes, and attached to the official minutes. Do we have any members of the public here who would like to address the board? And Madam Clerk, do we have any electronically submitted comments?
We do not, Madam Chair.
I will now move into our action items. We'll start with agenda item 9A to recommend authorization to execute a deed of ground lease and a parking garage agreement at the Manassas Park Station. Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for seeking a recommendation from the Operations Board to the Commissions to approve a ground lease agreement that we have been working on with the city of Manassas Park. And just in quick summary, as you recall, we've been collaborating with the city of Manassas Park for several years on a parking garage project over there. Previously, we brought those agreements for design, construction, operations, and maintenance of the parking facility, and tucked in those agreements alluded to the fact that we would eventually be coming back to you with this ground lease agreement. So here we are. Essentially, what that ground lease says is, it's a perpetual lease so long as VRE continues to operate. It is for, and I know it's for $1 a year for the actual lease, and it's one of the. There's a couple of pieces here left, but it's almost one of those final pieces before we go to construction for this important project. So, that's my summary, Madam Chair.
Okay, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Banks, seconded by Supervisor Lawson. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Now moving to item 9B, authorization to issue a request for proposals for construction management services for the Manassas Park expansion project. Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're seeking authorization from the Operations Board to issue a request for proposal for construction management services. Again, for the Manassas Park parking expansion project. This is simply, we are right at the end of final design. And so slightly ahead of going out with a construction solicitation, we want to be able to bring on a construction management team that can review our solicitation documents and then, of course, assist us through construction and then assist us at the end for project completion and commissioning. Again, this is just a request for the solicitation. Once we get your authorization, we will go solicit for this contract and of course, bring that contract or the results of that solicitation with the recommendation for award at that time, likely in a couple of months. So that's my summary, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Banks. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Supervisor Lawson. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Now moving to items 9C, authorization to amend contract for financial advisory services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Seeking authorization to execute a contract amendment for PFM Financial Services that will effectively increase the total authorization for this task order contract from $800,000 to $1.1 million. And as you recall, we had this item in front of you in February. And we had some discussions, some requests for additional information. And so we've since provided some additional information specifically about the contract and stuff. So what this, in this item here also adds some additional information that was asked for at the previous meeting. And more specifically, the projected task order contracts that will come out of this contract is some software licensing fees for financial modeling, some financial planning and analysis, and primarily to assist us with financial modeling for the phase 1, phase 2 planned service additions as part of Transforming Rail in Virginia. And then there'll be a task order in there for Treasury Management Consulting Services to support VRE with the solicitation we need to go out for banking services. So that's my summary, Madam Chair.
Motion to approve.
Moved by Ms. Bomke. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Garvey. Any discussion? Mr. Stork, please.
The banking services that you're referencing here, can you describe what that is?
I've got the expert right in the room, so Mr. Schofield can give you he's probably already got the, working on the draft right now.
Good morning. We have had our current bank provider for a number of years, and it is time to go out with an RFP for another competitive look at banking providers. And we have had a discussion with PFM about engaging their treasury management group to assist us in writing the RFP, helping us to evaluate the proposers that might come in, and helping to potentially negotiate when we have chosen a proposer. The RFP that we had previously is many years old. The banking industry has changed quite a bit in that time. We think that they can provide us both the expertise to sort of make sure that we're asking for what we need. And then ultimately, I think, as we say in there, the expected cost of that work is about $40,000 to $50,000. I think we would make back a significant amount of that expense over the coming years by having a more competitive negotiation on the banking fees with their assistance.
Banking services, the range of those services in general are?
This is like all of our sort of regular day-to-day banking. We currently bank with PNC. So essentially all of our AP and AR and just the regular day-to-day banking for VRE.
Clearing funds and so forth, clearing accounts and so forth.
I'm sorry, say again.
The clearing accounts that you have as well.
Yes. And if we needed, you know, a near-term credit, line of credit, things like that.
Seems high, but I can understand the need for it. Take another look at that.
Sure.
Ms. Bumpkin?
So just refreshing everybody's memory, I was the one that kind of challenged this at the last meeting and had some questions. I will say that I believe that Mr. Schofield has done a great job, and I really appreciated his summary of everything that's transpired since 2017. He did send me a draft of it last week, and we made a few little minor edits. And but I feel like this really spells out for really older board members, some that have been on the board for a long time, and then all the new members, really what we're doing with PFM. I believe that some of the fees are high, but it's the world of financial advisors right now. So, and PFM does phenomenal work for all of us, I believe. And so I'm in support of this, and I thank Mark for his efforts to put this together for the board.
Any other questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Schofield. We'll now move into item 9D, authorization to provide a letter of support to the city of Manassas Park for a U.S. Department of Transportation raise grant application for the Railroad Drive Culvert Rehabilitation and Reconstruction Project. Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we've been asked to provide a letter of support for this project. I'm just going to forward, and hopefully you guys can see this, and I'll draw some orientation for you. And I just want to drive to the specific benefit for VRE. If you draw down into the about the just slightly southwest of center of the map, you'll see Railroad Drive there. That is the primary access point into the surface parking lot for the Manassas station. That's effectively south of the railroad tracks there. There are two culverts in there that the city of Manassas Park has slated to rehabilitate and reconstruct. And as you can see in those two sections, they directly impact Railroad Avenue. And I think it's again, the utilizing the new bill funding funding abilities and stuff like that. Working with the city of Manassas Park on several things and stuff. We appreciate the fact that they've jumped right out on this and they're out there seeking some funding, because as you can see, that is critical infrastructure to access the surface parking lot there at for the city of Manassas Park's station there. So that's my summary, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Banks. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Walkinshaw. Any discussion? Mr. Banks?
I'd like to add something. Actually, you can see my placements. But besides that, the reason why we brought this to your attention is because we've got two culverts on the side, and they're facing the risk of collapse. And if they do, Manassas Drive collapses, which affects the riders coming in and out of Railroad Drive to the VRE station. So that's why we're asking for this funding. It's a very important issue. It's one of the top issues in our city because we're trying to save this main road here, Manassas Drive. And so with your assistance, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Any other comments or questions? Ms. Bumpkin?
I'm just kind of curious, Supervisor Banks, is this a project that's been going on for a while? I mean, I would think that this is something that Manassas Parks has been aware of for many years.
Yes. So it's a project we've been on top of, and we're just finishing it up to completion and making sure that risk is mitigated and isn't a risk anymore.
So you've already expended funds on other parts of this project. This is the last piece?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All in favor? Any opposed? And we'll move into now 9E, authorization to provide a letter of support to Prince William County for U.S. Department of Transportation Raise Grant Program application for the Route 123, Route 1 corridor at I-95 improvements. Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In summary, most of the members here have seen this project before. If you recall, late fall, November-ish, I think it was, we actually had a similar request from Prince William County. And this was for an application to NVTA. So this is the same project, but this is an application for raise grant. And so just to reorientate some of you to this, this is, if you look, of course, the VRE Woodbridge station is called out. There is one primary route in and out of the Woodbridge station. And of course, this project is depicted with the green dotted lines. This would add another access point into the Woodbridge station, which would be directly impacting, positively impacting VRE. And then, as you recall, there's some discussion about pedestrian and ped and bike paths as part of this project. So again, some of you have seen it, some of you haven't. But again, this request is it's not a different project. It's the same project for a different funding source. That's my summary, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Stork. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Walkinshaw. Any questions, comments, discussion? Ms. Garvey.
Money from another source seems like a real added to us, seems like a really good idea.
Any other comments? All in favor? Any opposed? We'll now move into item 10, information items, including ridership recovery efforts. Mr. Dalton.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Let me do a little table setting for you here. Obviously, over the course of, I'll just say most recently, the last couple of months, and of course, over the last couple of years, and almost, let's see, 2 years ago yesterday, as it relates to, and we want to spend a whole lot of time in our review mirror here, but it was 2 years ago yesterday that VRE, in response to COVID, we reduced our service level, and of course, we saw a dramatic decrease in our ridership. And there'll be some graphs coming up that will show that VRE was not alone. Okay, and so over the course of the last couple of years, and I will say almost immediately, we stood up a ridership recovery team made up primarily of staff members internally representing different functional areas, but it's been a really large collaborative effort. And so we've constantly had our eye on, okay, you know, when is that opportunity for the return of ridership? And again, we'll spend a little bit of time in our rearview mirror, but as you recall, you know, the big push was to get, you know, vaccines out there. That was sort of a milestone for us. And then shortly after, or some point after vaccines, where we thought the return of ridership would come back, then of course we had the Delta variant hit us. That kind of paused us. And then the Delta variant sort of did subside, and then Omicron hit us. So we've been at this, and we have just stayed focused and tried to keep it all in front of us. More specifically, in the last couple of months, and I've had questions by several of you in this room, several people outside of this room, as it relates to, you know, what are you doing relative to marketing? What are you doing as far as watching what the federal agencies are doing? And what are you doing in terms of, you know, monitoring just generally mobility in the region and stuff like that? So what I'd like to do here is I'd like to walk you through some of these different functional areas to answer, at least at this point, what are you doing, right? Or what is staff doing and how we're looking at this. Part of this is to establish some level of a baseline here, okay? Because with this level of a baseline, what I can do then moving forward is come back periodically, monthly or every other month, and just update you on some of the, successes, and even some of the potentially some things that we weren't looking at, or some things that changed and stuff like that. And constantly get more into a mode of where I can provide you updates leading into, the latter part of this year as we get into budget season and stuff like that. So I just want to emphasize the purpose of this is to, at some level establish like a baseline of information here for you, and then I can come back and do some updates for you as we go. So we have a lot of information. We could spend days on this. So we've tried to, summarize it, make it somewhat concise. And I do have staff representatives that are going to walk through some sections for you, but this is not inclusive. This has been a huge team effort. So with that, I'm going to get going here, and I'm going to pass first to Chris Henry, our Director of Operations, and he'll tell you essentially the functional areas that he's been championing and some of the things that we've been doing as it relates to ridership. So take it away. You've got control now, Mr. Henry.
I've got it. Thank you, Rich. Madam Chair, board members, thank you. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking back, but for folks who are new to the board, just to kind of illustrate the hole we're kind of in now as we're coming out of COVID. If you look at the graph there, it might be a little difficult to read, but this is the last four fiscal years, 19, 20, 21, and partway into 22 now. So those first two blue lines you'll see, fiscal years 19 and 20. Fiscal year 19 went along, that's kind of our normal trend. Fiscal 20 started out really strong. That's that second bar, the blue line, until we got to March. And March, as Rich mentioned, 2 years ago yesterday on St. Patrick's Day, we cut back service to the S schedule in reaction to the oncoming pandemic. And so everything since that time has been kind of trying to get back out of that kind of mode and see what we have now to build up from. So I'll see if I can. So if you look, so here's March. And just as an example, March, as Rich mentioned, the last few weeks have been pretty good for us. 2022 is this yellow line here. We had been sitting around 3,000, 2,800, 3,000 daily riders. And now in March, we're up to 3,700 average daily riders so far for the month of March, which is up significantly from the 2,800 that we had in February on average daily riders. So we are trending up, pretty quickly. Our goal is to try and figure out what is that new baseline going to be. Where we were at 18,000 essentially riders a day pre-pandemic, when the federal government comes back to work, when everybody starts going back into the office, if they're not coming back in 5 days a week, they're still doing some hybrid remote work. What is that new base going to be on a daily basis? And so to try and get that number, we've heard a lot of anecdotal things. Some agencies are saying, hey, we're coming back in March, we're coming back in April, we're going to come back 1 day every pay period. There's a lot of different strategies going on out there right now. So we said, well, let's take a look and see who is currently writing and compare that to who was writing in the pre-pandemic world. So we went back to the 2019 passenger, our customer service survey. And for the new board members, we do a survey every year. It's a very big survey. We do it out on board the trains. We talk to all of our passengers. We end up getting about 60 to 65% of our passengers for that day actually responding. So it's a great amount of detail and specificity that we get from them on their ridership patterns and other demographic information. But what we know from our past surveys is that 69% of our riders work for the federal government agencies. So that's a big chunk. We are a commuter service. The majority of our riders are tied to the federal government. So let's take a look and see if we can really narrow down what the federal government's going to do, when they're going to come back, so we can accurately predict or project what our new baseline is going to be. So with that, we look at the nice thing is we now have VRE Mobile. It's a technology that we didn't have several years ago, but now we have a database that says, we know who uses mobile because most of our passengers receive electronic smart benefits through the federal government transit subsidy program. We have that information. We know who their employers are, and we know who the transit benefit coordinators for those agencies are. So what I did here, there's the top 10 employers pre-pandemic and the top 10 employers currently based on the folks who are using smart benefits out there. And our effort at this point is to, not just sit back and wait for the federal government to, determine when they're going to come back. We're actually reaching out to the benefits coordinators of all of these agencies to get very specifics on what each agency is doing. So it will help us project up to what our new baseline is. But the more important thing is we're actually building relationships with these folks, because these benefit coordinators are the ones who are, as they're bringing folks back, are going to be talking to folks about their commute, how to use their benefits, what the best options are them. And we know that there's a lot of agencies right now trying to get people to stop driving because their parking lots can't take it anymore. We want to be the first option that those benefit coordinators push to their staff for their commute options. So we are calling them up, we're talking, we're building a relationship, we're going to participate with them in their commuter fares, their job fares, everything going forward, so that, again, we become at the top of their list for pushing commute options to their passengers. There's a lot of this that it's how we can then position ourselves to figure out what to do going forward, which we'll get to in a second.
I think Mr. Stark had a question.
Sure.
How do you define riders? What is a rider that's listed in your chart?
So in the daily rider number?
Is this the 703, for example?
Yes.
Up there?
So that means there were 703 DoD employees who were getting benefits allocated to VRE Mobile.
So they may or may not have ridden once or 20 times in a month. So the definition is they used it once in a particular month, or?
They're the ones who are currently receiving smart benefits. This doesn't say yet how often they've been riding, frequency of their rides or anything. It's just how many folks are actually receiving the benefits and allocating them to VRE Mobile. So the follow-up work that we're doing with the benefits coordinators is to find out, what are the new return to work patterns, so we can kind of quantify some of that.
Thank you.
But it also gives us the targets of who to go out and talk to. Of these top 10 employers, those account for 70% of the current folks who are getting benefits in our system. So we'll start with those 10. There's 170 employers on the list. So we're actually going to go through the entire list, because there may be some companies that only have 3 or 4 or 5 employees currently allocating to VRE Mobile, but they may employ 100 people. And so our goal is to try and get a deeper penetration into the rest of those 100 employees, wherever we can.
Go after the low-hanging fruit, the folks who are already using it.
That's right. Yep. The other thing that we noticed, and this is just kind of a side note, that ridership by line, so we have the Fredericksburg line, we have the Manassas line. traditionally has been Fredericksburg line generally carries a few more riders. About 55% of our ridership comes from the Fredericksburg line, 45 from the Manassas line. In the post-pandemic world, or at least where we stand right now, it's 65-35. Again, more focused on the Fredericksburg line than the Manassas line. We don't know, as more folks start coming back, will that kind of shift back to the previous kind of breakdown, or is this potential change that could persist and will help us direct our future marketing efforts to, hey, here's a bigger opportunity to get some more folks over on the Manassas line involved on the ridership.
Ms. Garvey?
Might follow up a little bit of Stuart's questions, I think. So this, we know how many people are on the trains.
Yes.
Are we surveying, and I'm sorry if I just missed it, are we surveying the people who are actually on the trains to find out who they are and why they're there?
Yeah, so the past surveys have been, that's exactly what we do. We go out on the trains, we ride the trains, we hand out surveys. We have additional staff from NVTC and PRTC that assist us with that. We put staff on every single train, pass out the surveys, get all the surveys back. We have a great return rate on that. We have not done it for the past couple of years because of the pandemic, but we do have the survey scheduled for May 25th this year. So it's a Wednesday. It's the Wednesday before Memorial Day. We will be out there on the trains again. We think that ridership will have come back a certain amount, but we're going to go out there. We're going to do a similar survey so that we can get real hard data on, who is currently riding right now.
That's great. And you're gonna find out like how often are they going in, once a week or twice? What a great practice audience. I mean, you're sitting on the train. What are you gonna do?
It is, and to be honest, we've looked for ways to do it through technology remotely and stuff, and we have not found a way that is as effective as being out there talking to the passengers, getting those hard answers from people who we know are actually on the train riding. So.
And then
let them know we care about them. I think it's good. Thank you.
if we have one more question, then we do have quite a few to get through. For Banks.
Oh, Chris, first, thank you so far for this presentation. It's very informative. Are we able to collect data from our kiosk at each station?
We can get sales data, but it doesn't necessarily tell us who that passenger is or where they're working or anything.
Like their ticket, like for instance, are they with their destinations? And
yes, yeah, yep, we can do that. We can, so if they're buying a ticket at the platform at Brook, we know where they're riding to based on whatever destination they've chosen there. So we do have that kind of breakdown. Okay, I will turn this over now to Chet Dunstan, who is our Marketing and Communications Engagement Manager. I think he was introduced just in the last month or so. He's new to the organization and he's got his hands full. Chet?
Good morning, everyone. So today I will be going over the digital marketing initiatives we have scheduled for this year, and I'll touch base on that. So here we have displayed as a Gantt chart of a partnership with iHeartMedia. Highlighted in yellow are the campaigns that we have been committed to and are scheduled for the beginning part of this year. And highlighted in gray are the campaigns under consideration. Also at the top, it has each month. So each campaign media duration will run for 4 weeks. And I'll get more into that. So let's hop into the first media. First we have is stream audio. VRE will target our core consumers leveraging iHeartRadio audience data across that vast network of digital radio stations with 15, 30, and or 60 non-skippable audio ads. Along with these audio ads, we'll have a corresponding companion banners. Listed below are the amount of impressions for the duration of this campaign. For those who may be wondering what exactly are impressions, impressions are pretty much the times the content has been displayed for this particular media. So viewers do not have to engage with this media in order for it to count as an impression. So it could be shared, and if two people share it, it's counted as two impressions. So you'll see that throughout the slide of the amount of impressions for each media. So again, this is for the duration of a 4-week run. Next we have is email marketing. Our deployments will be sent out to subscribers who are classified as commuters and/or federal government workers. We will reach 250,000 email addresses from the Virginia area that are classified as commuters and federal workers in the Virginia area. And again, listed are the total amount of impressions for the duration of this campaign. Yes.
Yes, please.
You have a 10% open rate guaranteed. What does the guarantee mean? That's a fairly low rate, open rate, but what does that mean?
So that's based off of, so that's the minimum, and that's pretty high. The average for any marketing communication via email is 17%. So we're guaranteeing 10% of these deployments are going to open. So that's actually really good based off of the communication that's sent to, marketing communication that's sent to inboxes.
And you define an open, because I've asked this question in multiple situations. How do you define an open?
So they open it, so that's when you have the click rate. So then that's when we break it down as far as if they actually click on and read the article, and it actually takes them
So
into.
they physically have to do something, not just that it comes up as a view.
Yeah.
They have to click on that to be able to. So.
Yes.
Okay.
And then based off of that email, it will prompt them to visit VRE.org, purchase a ticket, follow social media, and that sort. Next we have is geofencing. Geofencing, for those who may wonder as well, geofencing is location-based service which an app or other software program uses radio frequencies known as RFID, Wi-Fi, GPS, or cellular data to trigger a target marketing action such as text message, email, social media advertisement, or app notification. So a lot of brands and companies use this to pretty much build that customer relationship. So if it's a text message or if it's an app notification, if you're around the store, if you're shopping, we may have probably seen it in our daily life, but just maybe ignored it or opt out. This will be pretty much a target ad for like train stations, offices, and federal buildings. And again, this is the amount of impressions for the duration of this media. Next, we have is programmatic display. Again, this is something that we may have came across on our daily activities, whether if you're reading a blog, watching a news station. I personally see it all the time when I watch the news daily. We will launch desktop and mobile apps for iHeart's external website, as well as it will be targeted again to government workers and federal employees. And then as mentioned in the beginning of my slide, these are the two medias that we are considering for later this year. OTT video streaming. OTT video stands for over the top. So that's pretty much any stream audio that's on the internet. So Netflix, Disney Plus, YouTube. These will be 15 to 30 non-skippable ads that we'll be looking at promoting VRE. And then social media. Social media, we will be looking at paid ad campaigns such as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and YouTube as well. And just leveraging those audience to target new and existing riders to build more brand awareness and get riders back on board. This concludes my slide.
Any questions? Yes, Ms. Bagley?
I'm just curious if VRE has ever used like a referral program in the past, some sort of incentive for active riders to be benefited, get a week of free rides for activating others.
To my knowledge, I'm not sure if we have, but has been in talks of possibly partnering with just community outreach to build that as far as ridership.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments, Ms. Garvey?
Old fashioned techniques, and we considered like, having like a week or something, everybody comes on, they get a donut, some cookies, like the Santa rides are great. I was telling Fred Alcorn here, with the survey, I'm fascinated, finding out why people on the train is fascinating to me, and they sit down, here, how are you here? Would you like a donut? Have a cup of coffee? They're just that kind of a warm touch, I don't know. We might get crumbs on the train, I don't have a problem.
Madam Chair, it's a great segue into the next section.
Okay.
Ms. Bagley?
Sorry, I wasn't sure where this question belongs. I'm just gonna throw it out here, which is, I understand part of the challenge is that we may get people back, but less. So like federal employees are gonna go back 2 days a week. And so they may decide not to bother, like I'll just drive those 2 days. So is our marketing design, the actual content, and maybe this is better suited for later, but is the actual content designed to give other reasons to make this choice than just your personal convenience, but the environmental impacts, the larger rationale for somebody who might say, well, it's only the one day I have to sit in traffic, to get them to opt in for those reasons? Is that a part of the cultural language campaign?
Yes, so pretty much based off of when we send out these paid ads, the messaging will be different. So you may have something like where we had the radio ads run in the beginning part of this year, was trade the traffic for the train, which was geared to people that were actually driving, then versus what's scheduled to come out to get people back in the mindset of coming back into the workplace. And then later, we will look at different ways to market as far as, eco-friendly to get people back on the train. So it will change. It's not same across the board.
We'll take these last two and then we'll move on. Pumpkin?
So would it be true if I assumed that for the people that are teleworking and then choosing to drive in, does the federal government still give them some kind of a subsidy that's not the same as if they rode the train? Is that a true statement?
They're equal.
They're equal, even if they drive in?
Really?
That's really, okay. Well, my assumption was incorrect.
It's actually been a fight over the years to keep it equal because some administrations have wanted to increase the parking benefit at the expense of the transit benefit. So it's equal.
Thank you.
Mr. Alcorn?
But just to build on that, I was gonna bring this up later, but with the express lane expansions, both on 95 a little farther south and also on 66, and those coming online at the end of the year, there is no subsidy for the tolls. So I guess one question, and I don't know, maybe it's too early now, but in the marketing of VRE, is that gonna be an issue? In other words, is there a way to basically do comparisons of, yeah, you could take the express lanes, here's what you're gonna get, or that information I think might be very helpful. Because I do worry frankly that we're gonna lose riders, once the express lanes open up.
As far as speaking to, as far as the express lanes open up, I feel like there is something that we are looking at as far as to promote. I know there's the Roosevelt Bridge closure, which we are scheduling paid campaigns to go out on social to drive more people to ridership pretty much for VRE.
Okay, and I would just recommend, I don't wanna make anybody mad, with the express lanes or anywhere else, but this is a competition too. So let's keep that in mind. And I'm okay with, making comparisons for our constituents, and showing what a value VRE is.
And I'll throw in that a little bit later, Nick is gonna be talking about a lot of the traffic data that we were able to get, so he may be able to speak to some of
Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Just real quick comment. I know you want to move along. Mr. Alcorn, the former ops board has had the same view. Like I don't remember any specific examples, but I remember Ms. Crystal and other ops board members making the same point that, you know, our job here is to protect VRE's interest and do all we can to boost our ridership, whether it was Metro or whoever else was the discussion of the day. So to your point, that's the ops board's history.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Next, we have Joe Sports.
Madam Chair, members of the board, morning again. As you can imagine, the public affairs functions and the government relations functions overlap in many ways with the marketing function. So we wanted to go over a few of the things that we're doing that are public affairs-y, but they're also geared towards sort of marketing efforts to bring ridership back.
So, thanks, Joe. I'm Karen Finucane Clarkson, and I'm working with Joe on community engagement and outreach. VRE's community engagement and outreach initiative is really focused on 6 key groups. The primary audience is potential riders, and then the 5 others are conduits that we can use to reach those audiences. These days, when we think of potential riders in marketing terms and meeting them where they are, as Chet pointed out, it's online platforms, it's digital. But I don't think we should rely solely on these platforms. So what we're doing is sort of saying, okay, let's look back at what worked for us previously. Everything old is new again. I recall a conversation with Sharon Bulova, who used to serve on this board, and she spoke to me about the grassroots effort to convince people to move commuter rail forward in Virginia. And that was a wonderful, wonderful campaign in the 80s and 90s. And it's an approach that can still work today. I think we have a lot to learn from that. So what we're going to do is we're going to meet our riders where they are physically. We're looking at community events, farmers markets, fairs, and festivals. Our presence at these events will allow us to actually interact with and hear from prospective riders, current riders, and even former riders. And what we're going to have is basically a new rider card. And on that new rider card will be a QR code, and it will send them to a landing page where they can learn how to ride VRE, and they can also get a free ride coupon. We've mapped out dozens upon dozens of opportunities over the next months to engage with the community. While the size of the audience varies, each event allows us to reach hundreds, if not thousands, of potential riders. I was really surprised to discover that in the summer, the Manassas Park Farmers Market gets as many as 4,000 shoppers in a 5-hour period on a Saturday.
Personal space. Do you not go, Mr. Banks?
So Rich and I have talked a lot lately about being more proactive in interacting with the business community in our region, and mostly through the local chambers of commerce. We're looking at a 2-pronged strategy here, where first we want to find opportunities to work with the employers to help get our message out to their employees, working with them to pass along marketing materials to their current employees, as well as including information about VRE for their new hires as they do their onboarding. We also want to advocate for them to take advantage of the transit incentive programs that would allow them to provide a pre-tax transit benefit if they're a private company. And then secondly, we want to build grassroots support within the business community for our commuter and regional services, continuing to amplify the benefits that we were just talking about to the business businesses that employ our riders, things like expanding their area for potential employees, providing more stress-free commutes, leading to happier, more productive employees, and all of the other benefits of having employees use VRE. And the VRE is also an important asset for the region and its strong economic growth, providing benefits whether their employees ride VRE or not. Giving workers transportation alternatives leads to vibrant communities and economic growth. Each of the chambers has a legislative agenda each year, and I'll be working to make sure that their advocacy efforts include issues important to VRE. And so starting this spring, Rich and I will be much more engaged with the chambers, especially up in the Virginia region, as we expect these efforts to pay dividends in the future.
So some realtors and leasing agents recognize the importance of VRE, as you can tell from this piece that ran in last week's Washington Post. Our plan, knowing that there are some who do not recognize the importance of VRE, is to reach out to realtors and leasing agents in the region and get them material, educate them and get the material that they can share with prospective home buyers and apartment renters in areas not far from VRE stations. We're going to accomplish this by working with associations representing these groups. Through articles in their newsletters, we'll highlight the benefit of pitching VRE as an amenity to their clients. We'll also provide a link where they can request information from us that they can then share with their clients. It will be very similar in nature to what we'll use with the new riders. It'll have that QR code and they'll be able to go to that same landing page. VRE jurisdictions played an instrumental role at the height of the pandemic by basically amplifying our messaging on the health and safety precautions that we were taking for riders. We plan to build on that and work with our partners at the jurisdictions, giving them newsletter articles and also social media posts. The same holds true for our elected officials. Many of you amplified our messaging during the pandemic, and we appreciate that. We'll be reaching out to you again and to other elected officials at PRTC, NVTC, and in our jurisdictions as a whole to get you again to work with us and amplify that messaging. We've previously worked with other agencies in the region to basically promote public transit as being reliable, safe, and convenient. Last year's Moving Forward Together campaign, which was led by NVTC with a grant from DRPT, was a well-coordinated effort and seems to have gotten a lot of good support and good results. So relying on the lessons we learned from that campaign, we're going to be moving ahead with a new one called Rediscover Your Ride. NVTC is again taking the lead, PRTC is involved as well, and DRPT is providing materials and funding. This campaign will supplement, but not supplant, any of the efforts that we're undertaking. It's scheduled to launch on June 1st. So, Metro Rail's Yellow Line Bridge shutdown this fall certainly makes VRE an attractive alternative. And you mentioned it's a competition, but we work in partnership with Metro, but it is an opportunity for us to be able to attract new riders. VRE's operations staff, Chris's department, public information will be working with NVTC and WMATA as part of a mitigation team to develop strategies. And so throughout the summer, particularly come August, we'll sort of change our outreach strategy a little bit and hit our core stations, Alexandria, Crystal City, and even Franconia, Springfield. And now I would like to switch over to Nick Ruiz.
Any questions so far from the past presentation, comments?
Promise on the last one. Nick Ruiz here, Planning Program Manager, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about some of our pre-COVID rider patterns from an origin destination standpoint, as well as some of the changes that we've seen 2019 to 2020 since COVID began. But also I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the changes to general auto trips, both commuting and non-commuting in VRE service territory, which might give you all some ideas as to where potential future markets could lie. Now, to do this, we use a combination of cell phone location data through a company called Streetlight, as well as our own internal VRE fare payment data, where I think there was a question earlier about do we have access to fare data that shows origin destinations, and the answer is yes, we do. And so for those of you who might not be familiar with the idea of a catchment area, it's basically an area where the majority of our ridership comes from and goes to our various stations. And so we use that as kind of the baseline for our analysis, looking at our potential markets, because we know from previous studies that these zones, I mean, the vast majority, over 90% of our customers are coming from or going to locations in those zones. And so I'm going to go to the next slide, and I can sit with this slide as long as you want if you have questions. But basically, from a Fredericksburg line origin destination perspective, in 2019, we had a very varied origin destination kind of paradigm here. We saw actually a pretty significant, I mean, this is probably no surprise to the older, the members of the board with more tenure, that 40% of the total line activity was in and out of LaFont. That was our most popular destination station. Fast forward to 2020, and we saw some kind of interesting patterns emerge. Obviously, the volumes decreased by orders of magnitude on the Fredericksburg line, but LaFont actually dropped in prominence in favor of Union Station. So 41% of the ridership was originating and terminating at Union Station versus only 12% at LaFont. We also started to see some very defined DoD military kind of patterns coming out of here. Spotsylvania to Quantico, Quantico to Union Station, Lorton to Union Station. That's obviously places where bases are located and DoD installations are located. And so to kind of treat this as the baseline, when most people did not need to go into work, there were still people that needed to go into work, and those people were going to these following areas. On the Manassas line, it's a little bit of a different story. In 2019, 80% of total line activity came from the four outermost stations: Burke, Manassas Park, Manassas, and Broad Run, and went into the core of DC. And in 2020, while the volumes obviously were off by orders of magnitude, still 72% of that line's ridership came from the end three stations: Broad Run, Manassas, and Manassas Park. And interestingly enough, we saw kind of a flip-flop where Burke Center was really putting, Burke and Broad Run were putting the majority of the riders on the system every day. That actually changed to Manassas. So we don't know why that is, but that's what was happening. And just before I go on to the next slide, because I know that's a lot of information in a short period of time, did anyone have any questions about these patterns?
Okay, I have one question. Sure. I might show my ignorance here. If your location services are off on your phone, you still have the ability to track. Is that correct?
I don't know. I think if your location services is off, but the phone is still on, I think it's actually using cell phone, like the ping data. And I think that's independent of like whether location services for individual applications on your phone is turned on. But we used a third-party company that has a very proprietary kind of algorithm that determines, where people are going based on their
So they can still see, even if you're off, they have the ability to see where all their customers are to validate this data.
I'm not sure because it's a proprietary source. But there is a privacy element baked into it. For example, if you try to get down to a very specific subset, like measuring a very small area to a very small area, and there's not enough sample size, they'll cut that out. They'll say, you can't see that because, they don't want to identify that Ms. Baumke is leaving her house and going to work, So they would cut that out.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Mr. Walkinshaw?
Yeah. Interesting charts, but obviously the value in the data would be if we could really understand who these riders are.
Participant has left the meeting.
Why some have returned and why some haven't. And it sounds like we don't really know much about why this shift has happened. And I guess the question is, for the upcoming ridership survey, will we be able to get some deeper analysis of that? Because this is interesting, but there's nothing we can do with it.
Yeah, and I think that the upcoming survey.
I was gonna say,
Okay.
this is showing movement. This is showing people moving in the region. To your point, we can't just rely on this alone. We have to rely on some of these other efforts, survey work and all that, to start slowly pulling all this together. Now, the survey that we'll take in May will essentially tell us what folks are doing now and likely to do in the future. What we were trying to do here is really establish some baselines here. So we could also look at, and to some degree, validate streetlight data or ticketing data and kind of pulling all that together, because it's even going to be more important, and Nick will show you here in a little bit, where it's not just about VRE ridership here. We're looking at mobility in the region. Where are people moving and at what time of days are they moving? And do we have the ability with the level of service that we're offering, can we capture those markets?
Absolutely. From our perspective, though, with this data, it would be very valuable to know why have riders returned to Manassas at a higher rate than other stations. But it sounds like we don't know that.
Yeah, and this, just to caveat, this is 2020, calendar year 2020 data. So we might have seen, once we have, newer, more fresh data, we might see a return to kind of previous patterns or not. This was just, like Rich said, establishing that baseline of when most people did not need to ride, those that still were sticking with the system for one reason or the other, exhibited these patterns.
Got it. We just need to really figure out who those people are and how do we find more of them. Yes.
Okay.
I think one thing, especially as somebody who knows that corridor very, very well, I don't think we should underestimate the impact of construction on I-66 or the moving of people during that year, because it was massive construction. And I know I avoided it. So I could see people out in the Manassas Park and Broad one hopping on that, because most of the construction was on that part of the 66 corridor. It's now moved closer to the Beltway.
All right. So moving on, this slide really shows, so we're transitioning from VRE origin destinations to what are auto trips doing in the VRE, between the VRE catchment areas. And so what we did is we ran an analysis of all of the Fredericksburg line catchment areas to the core. So those 4 station catchment areas. And what you see in 2019, 2020, and 2021 is there was a pretty significant drop off in the AM peak, so that 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. window of automobile trips into the core from the Fredericksburg line. Something that I think is even more of a significant trend that we really can't ignore is that right now in 2021, or using 2021 data, the PM northbound volumes are higher on the weekend, are higher than the AM northbound volumes on the weekday. So there are more automobiles going between, and this is between VRE catchment areas and the core. So not just in general, this is like potential, market or people that VRE could potentially serve. And so that's something that, that was surprising to us when we got this data. But I think if you've driven 95 on the weekend, it's, pretty plain to see.
Yeah, sure. Just very quickly, that may be changing. I mean, just driving down here this morning and seeing all the traffic trying to get up 95. So this may be an anomaly, but
Yeah.
I thank you for watching because
Yes.
it's in there.
Definitely. There are others.
Oh, I thought you had a question. No.
Okay. And really on the Manassas line in the same direction, it was kind of the same story. I mean, almost an exact number of cars, number of trips at the exact times of day. So it's a rather balanced kind of demand pattern. going in on the Manassas line. And then the next two slides are really just the reverse. It's people from the core going back in the afternoon. And you can see that right now it's roughly less than half of the auto trips that were coming south to the Fredericksburg line catchment areas in 2021 that were going home in 2019. And also still a pretty significant contingent traveling between 10 and 3 and 3 and 8 on the weekends coming in the outbound direction. From the Manassas line, it's really the same. And if you're wondering what the VRE logo is doing above those, that's showing what the market that our service serves today. But there are a lot of bars that aren't being served. So, and then final substantive slide here. Really, I want to highlight that ridership is in many ways a factor of the service that's operated. And this is kind of a chart that shows the monthly ridership and obviously a very significant decline between March and April of 2020 and a very shallow recovery up through the last data month that we have, which is November 21, really mirrors our peer systems that operate a very similar type of service. Sounder out in Seattle operates a very similar type of service into Seattle in the morning, out in the afternoon, similar number of trains. Contrast that with a system like Tri-Rail, which runs all day in both directions and has a much more varied origin destination kind of market. They've seen a much more significant and steady increase in ridership, almost back to half of what they were carrying before the pandemic.
Would you say again the characteristic of Tri-Rail, why they're?
Yeah, and I think it's because they run service throughout the day in both directions. But that's only half the story. They also serve multiple origin destinations. So there might be 4 major employment centers along their route. So you might have customers going between, 1/4 of the way, and then as the train goes south, another customer gets on and they're going another 1/4 of the way. Whereas with our ridership, it's primarily outer to in and in to out. And I think that's allowed them to see a much more of a resilience in their.
What you said, it's throughout the day, so you would have people who maybe wanted to do shopping or something instead?
There's a big tourism contingent, as Rich has pointed out, when we reviewed these slides, it's a huge tourism contingent. A lot of people ride to the regional tourism destinations down in South Florida. So
It's in Florida. Okay, that's-
yeah,
Yeah, just for a point of
Miami area.
clarification, this is Miami to Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah,
And,
and they serve a major airport, actually 2 major airports, international airports. So
They have
it's like birthday passes. Oh, same thing.
And the beach, palm trees and the beach, thank you.
So areas of future study, we're in the very beginning phases of updating our VRE system plan. And as part of the system plan update, we're going to be exploring some service scenarios that are kind of in addition to our traditional weekday peak period, peak direction. And we're going to develop some ridership and revenue scenarios based on some return to work assumptions and project that ridership in the out years for the horizon year of the plan. I think that's going to be very helpful in future discussions on how service might need to change or might not in the future. We're also looking to identify some complementary transit partnerships to kind of help increase the span of service, times that maybe VRE doesn't operate, as well as to provide last mile connections, first mile connections to the transit stations. We're obviously going to continue to work with VPRA and Amtrak to explore cross-owner ticketing options, schedule optimization, as Mr. McLaughlin alluded to earlier in the meeting. And we'll also use the system plan effort to explore some fare policy enhancements that might be necessary to serve other markets. So that's it. Any additional questions?
I do have a comment / maybe question. This may be to the marketing team, but we have different like weather events that may take place. Like for instance, this morning, the fog was really bad. I wonder, is it possible to take advantage of weather events? Like if we know that there is going to be heavy rain on a Tuesday and try and target potential riders to say, hey, maybe jump on the VRE instead of driving, excuse me, instead of driving. I wonder if we've thought about that or if that's too granular, too specific to try and target people with.
No, that's actually a great idea. I think right now our focus is just the return to ridership.
Sure.
But as we get into the swing of getting back into work, getting more riders on board, those are the small things that we'll pay attention to and start pivoting our messaging, such as a point she mentioned as far as making more personal relationships and doing things like on board. Even some things that I brought to the table of doing the old school method of sending out postcards, just to bring that brand awareness around. So that is something that we will consider later this year.
Sure, and I think to Ms. Bagley's point about, you may have those riders who say, oh, I'll just take this one day to send to traffic. Those may be the people that we try and target with these maybe weather events or very specific things where VRE would be more advantageous than other modes of transportation.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Ms. Garvey?
So I had two completely different questions, and then I think I'll be done. I'm sorry, I've asked a lot. Going back a couple slides, the jump up in Mark, I think it was Mark ridership in August 21. What was, did they like just open up or increase? What happened there? Is that Mark, the one that went up the dark blue line?
Yeah.
Did they just like open up or something?
The short answer is yes. That's when they started not only to return to a full schedule, Monday through Friday, but they returned back, they operate a weekend service. So they returned to that weekend service as well. So that's where you see the.
Well, that's pretty cool to see what happened there when they did that. And then a completely different question. I assume we have analyses on what happens when the price of gas goes up to people coming over to transit. Is there some data just sort of in general on that?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, in previous analysis efforts, did we look at the elasticity, I guess, of?
Yes, that's the term.
Yeah.
Elasticity.
Yeah. We haven't done extensive elasticity studies regarding VRE service, but more from an anecdotal perspective over the years, and particularly back in, the 2010 to 2015 timeframe when gas prices were higher, or even going back to like 2009, 2010, we did see anecdotally a correlation between our ridership growth as the gas prices went up. But it's certainly an area now in the context of a system plan and better understanding of our system that we can look at in more depth, see where things are now, as well as overall elasticity.
Madam Chair, I'll add to that from a national commuter rail perspective and going back to that 07, 08, 09 timeframe. Basically, about every 10% increase in the price of fuel actually resulted in about a 6 to 7% increase in commuter rail across the nation.
That's what I was kind of wondering.
So that was significant as it relates specifically to VRE, and I'd have to dust this off a little bit, but we saw something similar to that. But anyway, I just thought I'd share that data point with you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
So, sorry, Mr. Marshall raises his hand too. Do you want to know that per some of Nick's slides and for full disclosure, Nick and I used to work together at DRPT. It's good to see you again, Nick. Just want to remind folks that as you see some of the trends that are more balancing out instead of just peak rides and then very small demand for late service or other non-peak. That is part of the agreements we have with VRE, Amtrak, and CSX that we will have the ability to run weekend service starting in 2026 and beyond, and also some late night service will be coming online about that time frame. Now, we need our construction projects to meet that timeline. There's a trigger of service when construction is done. So I think it's meeting some of the possible goals that Nick outlined that we've heard from the board as well. That it's not just about peak service, that you want to provide 7 day a week service to your communities to and from locations. So we might all know that, but just want to remind you all that we're, as Secretary Miller said, we're trying to be here to help you, and we think that that's a great part of the agreement. Not just extra peak service, but late night and weekend service.
Very helpful. Mr. Walkinshaw?
Yeah, I just want to thank Rich and the team for putting this together. I've been kind of in Rich's face on this this topic over the last several months. So I do, and I really appreciate all the work that's been done. I do think it really is, and this is a question probably for commuter rail systems across the country. I think it's an open question whether the traditional model of 9 to 5 white collar workers is a viable model. Won't prejudge it, maybe it is, but I think it's very much an open question. And so I think it's just so key for us, and it seems like most of our marketing efforts are focused on capturing back as many of our traditional riders and new riders who are in the traditional mold from federal agencies, which that's bread and butter. We got to do it, but I think we have to push ourselves to think very differently about how do we reach and talk to and hear from different kinds of riders. So to Mr. McLaughlin's point, in terms of Saturday service for tourists, we're not gonna be Miami to Fort Lauderdale, but we have a lot to offer. Shift workers, essential workers that are going into their place of work, no matter what different hours of the day. We're gonna have the capability to do more of that moving forward, but I think we have to think now about how do we talk to those folks and ask them what they need from us? What are the barriers? How much of it is schedule? How much of it is fare? How much of it is awareness and knowledge? So I think to the extent we can start to work that into our marketing efforts now and our outreach efforts now, in addition to our bread and butter of trying to get DoD folks back and new DoD folks on the train, figuring out how to talk to a different category of potential riders is going to be really important. If we put that project off until we see the ridership plateau, wherever it's going to plateau at 10,000 or 15,000, it's not going to plateau at 20,000 with our traditional riders. If we put that project off, we're going to be behind the game. So I appreciate the work that's been done. I think personally, I think that's the direction that we need to go.
And Madam Chair, we're not putting that project off. It's combined in all of this. And again, we can sit here for hours and talk, obviously, but, and Joe and Karen kind of touched on some of that elements as far as reaching back into our communities and getting that firsthand information on what their needs are and what that, and part of that starts with developing those relationships and stuff like that. So that is part of the overall treatment plan. Like I said, there's a lot of elements to this, and I really appreciate everybody sitting for the 45 minutes bearing through this with us. But it's important, and there's a lot to unpack here and a lot to do, frankly.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. So what would be helpful so I'm from Spotsylvania, is if you wanted some data on what constituents down there would like to see, if you could give us some questions that you'd like us to ask of our constituents, I think that would be very helpful. Being in Spotsylvania, I think the weekend trips would be extremely popular. Traffic on 95 is really bad. You don't even want to go there. So if you could provide some sort of guidance on that, then perhaps we could push it out I would certainly push it out to my people.
And I think the other thing too is obviously utilize us as community leaders to help, push the word about VRE and returning to ridership and, what events that we may be having that it may be good to have a representative there or us act as a representative. So I think keep that in mind as well. Mr. Alcorn.
Yeah, thank you. And I support everything that's been said. This is an excellent start. I think a lot of things underway. I would just provide some insight that something that I'm thinking about. When I first got out of college, I went to work for Fairfax County, and I worked there for 4 years. And when I worked there, I knew that Fairfax County would always be there. That Fairfax County was going to be an employer. It wasn't a question. Then I went to work for the private sector, and I went to work for a company, and it became very clear to me very quickly that company does not need to exist. That company will only exist if it brings in the revenue, if it actually does what is necessary to add value and be a going concern. That's an incredibly useful mindset. And I would encourage you all as you go through this process to think about it this way. Think about this as an existential challenge for VRE to attract ridership. Because I think, and we're all here to support you, and obviously, hopefully we'll never get to that, but we are looking at it. I mean, this is a point in time that that ridership in one form or another is gonna need to come back. There's gonna need to be a new way of getting riders in and basically do this as if the existence of VRE depends on it. That would be my encouragement. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take one more, and then if we can just push comments to board members' time, just for, I think we're at 11:06 now.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to add on to what other people have said, because I'm sitting here processing and thinking, and staff has done a phenomenal job in their presentation, and I think this is really the crux of VRE going forward. It's the most important conversation that we're going to have. So I just want to throw one thing out as I'm sitting here in the evenings now watching the NCAA tournament, you know, and it doesn't matter what sports are on TV, they all have very clever commercials, and thinking about, and I don't know if we have this expertise in house, and if we don't, do we go out and find somebody that can do this? Like Libby was saying, you know, the donuts program, you know, the old donuts for dads, or we've got to come up with something that is really clever, that is going to capture the attention, as what you just said, Mr. Alcorn, to really move VRE up here. So it's something that people are thinking about, especially when it relates to our new workforce development boards in the Commonwealth and how we're trying to get people back out to work. I know the governor's restructuring some of those workforce boards to make them a lot more functional. But anyway, I just throw that out. If we don't have that expertise, you know, do we need somebody from the Martin Agency in Richmond that can, you know, do like what they did with Geico, you know, and so anyway, I just throw that out, just kind of thinking out of the box a little bit.
We will now move into item 10B, which is the spending authority report. Mr. Dalton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's just 3 items on the spending authority report. If you've had a chance to look at it, if you have any questions or anything, I'll take questions now. Ron?
Any questions for Mr. Dalton? Is there a motion?
No.
Okay, all right. All right, we're going to move closed session to next month. And so now we'll just go around to agenda item 12, operation board members time. So we will start with Mr. Stork. Ms. Bagley?
We're good, thanks.
This was fascinating. Thank you so very much. And then the last thing, I keep thinking, because I'm doing this with Metro and everything, you know, we have to justify ourselves and why are we here? And I think we provide, and then think about what it would be like if there were no VRE, if there were no Metro. Oh my God, we don't have a future. So somehow I think we're in a transition period. We gotta get over to the other side. Thank you very much.
I'll defer, thank you.
No, thank you.
Actually, quick question for you. Is there a Transit Appreciation Day event happening right now?
Absolutely.
You may want to talk about that.
11 there is a taco truck in the bus yard. The which only one to partake. I will be meeting, I think, Supervisor Angry in a bit to guide people out there, but certainly I can escort folks out there if they'd like to go and get their tacos. They are fantastic. We did yesterday at the Western facility, and today we'll be here until 3 o'clock.
That's the most important news of the day.
Indeed.
Guys, I'm assuming. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? See you all next time. Thank you. April 22nd.
You know,